Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is I was going to say, an ineffable. I'm too early for big words. Ansgar,
See, this is
Ansgar
why I
Odinson.
just didn't go to sleep last night. But for those of you who the holiday has already come, Happy New Year. And for those who it's about to come up, I hope you're enjoying your New Year's Eve.
Yeah, I'm. I should have been smart and just push through. Oh well, I got
Uh,
loads planned today anyway. So thank you all for joining us. This is going to be our first in what I hope is going to be sort of a series on writing. I am actually probably first and foremost a writer, and I have had a lot of people have been asking me questions about it for some time and said, well, gee, are you going to do it on In Time? So we're going to do it on In Time. And I figure probably do it a few times and just let people call in and ask questions and discuss any elements of writing anybody wants to discuss. I hosted for quite a long time, oh my God, 10 years, a series on business and craft of writing, talked about getting agents, talked about writing all kinds of books, and I write regularly, as most people know. So I don't know if we have any questions yet or where people wanted to start with, but
I have a
I
couple
am,
questions.
oh, all
Let's
right,
start with,
sure.
what is your favorite genre to write in?
Um, oh, that's a really good question. I have a problem, which is I don't usually stick to genres,
Hmm.
and that's problematic when selling a book. So the first book I ever had that was represented was called From Inside the Mirror, and it was about a former FBI agent who had kind of a shadowy past. It's some of it seemed rather boilerplate, but he was a sociopath and absolutely brilliant. He was a Holmesian level detective. but he used everybody around him. He was brutal to everybody around him. But if you needed a case solved, he was the guy you brought along. Now, he wreaked havoc with absolutely everything, but he was the guy you had on. Now, in this was the first in a series, and in it, about a quarter of the way through, he starts to come unglued, and people have been predicting he'd come unglued at some point. He was always kind of a maniac, and by about 2/3 of the way through, most of the people reading felt that, as was intended, that they didn't really care whether or not the mystery was solved. They didn't care. They wanted to know if this guy was going to make it through the book without blowing his own brains out. He was fast becoming an alcoholic. He was destroying everything around him, completely falling apart. Now, by most accounts, this was actually closer to a psychological thriller. It read that way. There was a lot of psychological manipulation going on, but it had the complete format of a mystery. So Avalon Books was actually one of the only ones who were willing to even touch it, and they would only publish it if I pulled out all the swear words. Give me a break. The guy gets shot, and there's a Chicago cop gets shot in the hip. He doesn't sit there and go, "Oh, darn!" But
Oh, golly gee willikers.
golly gee, oh, that Talon round went right into my so yeah, they have a brand, and they said they loved it, but only if, and they knew I was going to say no too. The head of the editorial board said, "Look, you'd be an idiot to say yes, because you're going to water down the book. It's not going to be as good, but we like it. We see it for what it is, but we'll only publish it under these circumstances." Now, but the big problem most of them had was a lot of them loved it, but they said, we can't actually market the thing. The reason we can't market the thing is, if we put it in the mystery section, halfway through, people are going to sit there and say, well, you know, this is all about what's going on in his head, what's going on with the other people. It's about these relationships. And in a mystery section, the mystery comes first. You know, people have disagreed with me on occasion. They'll say, oh, well, gee, what about, famous detectives like Sherlock Holmes, Columbo, whatever. Okay, the mystery still comes first. It's driven by the mystery, not by the character. This was driven by the character. So they're like, most people don't care about the mystery by the time you get done. So it's a psychological thriller, but we can't put it in a psychological thriller because people are going to open it up and say, wait a minute, it starts with a mystery. There are cops solving it. This is a mystery. Nobody's going to want it. So genre becomes, if you want to have any success, usually you have to try to stick inside a genre. I have a very hard time doing that. And that's been one of the difficulties. I don't have, if you really, the type of writing I actually most prefer to do, I think, is just nonfiction. I prefer to do essays, stuff like that. That's what I'm best at. But I have a lot of books I've written and that I enjoy doing, and I usually cross history, psychological. I've got a psychological thriller about a woman who is investigating a man in the 1980s she believes was responsible for the destruction of her village in Italy. It was a Nazi when the Nazis surrendered in World War. Sorry, not the Nazis. When the Italians surrendered in World War II, there were Nazi regiments in every one of the major cities there, and these regiments went from being allies to being occupying forces, and they were so upset at the betrayal that they destroyed everything on the way out. And this one's about a Nazi hunter who's okay. So the genres start to get a little blurred in a lot of these things. So I don't think I have a favorite genre per se.
So, first of all, remember Sammy Jenkins has greeted us from the future and said Happy New Year.
Oh,
and Mikey does have a question. He wants to know if you can express the importance of a place to write.
Ooh. A few different schools of thought on that one. If you're doing nonfiction, usually the thinking is you should be able to write just about anywhere, anytime. And I think that comes sort of from a journalistic school. Journalists will write on a plane or write wherever they. Our brains are wired to respond to familiar things. And writing well takes a good deal of effort. It takes a good deal of concentration. And anything that you can do to help with that, usually will help you do it faster and become more and more reliable over time. So one thing that helps is, aside from having a routine, and most, Hemingway would speak about his routine. Hunter S. Thomason would have a routine, but I don't recommend doing that many drugs. Um,
Oh, why
there's
not?
a lot. Yeah. Uh, but having a place, and especially a place that's quiet, a place I get distracted really easily. So I do my best writing between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. That wasn't the writing schedule I had for The Water Thief. It was that all the time. There wouldn't be lights coming through as cars came by. You wouldn't hear horns. The phone wouldn't ring. The children wouldn't. Uh, and one of the things, and Mikey and I had spoken about this earlier, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to get fully into the creative process. At least if you're practiced in it, it takes about
Hmm.
10 or 15 minutes before you're really creating. So getting out of that process takes a quarter of a second. If the phone rings, you're probably starting to get out of it. And if you talk, you're fully out of it.
I tend to have the opposite problem when it comes to both
Oh,
writing and art. Interestingly enough, um, once I get into the creative mind, right? Like
mhm,
it's now that I'm creating. My mind will not give up until I've reached a certain point, until I have fully expressed my ideas onto the page or, into the computer, depending on whether I'm doing art or writing. I can't sleep. I can't concentrate on anything else. It consumes my mind until those creative ideas are expressed. It's I don't know. Just I don't know if that's just a me thing.
no, well, I often feel that way too, and I can get very obsessive about it. But and it's not always like that, and it's been a little less like that as I get older, which is
Mm.
unfortunate. But um, I would imagine, though, let's assume that you get interrupted in some way that you can't avoid. It probably takes a few minutes once you get back to the creative process. It takes a few minutes to get back into the actual stream, to get back into where was I, what was I doing, what was the next step, where was I going to go from here, and then you get back into it, and then you're going again.
Usually I
But getting
can't even let it go then. Even while I'm trying to do regular life stuff, like I'm, talking with my wife, I'm, you know, um, taking care of the kids when I was, when they weren't adults and couldn't take care of themselves. Like I wouldn't in my mind, I am
Mhm.
still in that mode. I could not jump out of it. I
Yeah.
can't. Driving to the drugstore the entire way there, all I'm thinking about is these ideas, which is one of the reasons I started bringing along with me a little book that
Mhm.
I would jot things down the entire time because things would come to me.
Yeah, I do recommend having a book for ideas, and certainly I keep one by the nightstand, because a lot of people get their ideas also when they're asleep. And I think it was
Mm.
what's his name, guitarist for Rolling Stones.
We've got a couple questions. One's for me, one's for you.
Uh,
Sammy
uh, uh,
Jenkins. Hmm?
who was the guitarist for Rolling Stones?
Oh, let me see.
Kept a guitar by his bed. He was told to keep a guitar by his bed because he'd be most creative when he woke up, and sometimes right in the middle of the night.
Uh,
If he got an idea, that way he could do it.
uh,
And
well, let's see. That's Rolling Stone
I can't
magazine.
remember.
Sorry. I can't. Mick Jagger.
Oh, no, Mick Jagger's the singer.
Oh.
Um,
Hmm.
don't worry about it. Anyways, he would
Anyways.
keep a guitar by his bed, and one morning a guitar and a recorder, so that if he got inspired in the middle of the night, he could just you know go up and do. It was no, and it was actually no, it wasn't him. Okay, at any rate, so one morning he wakes up, and a full hour of recording has been spent. It was on an old
Keith Richards.
tape. That's it. That's it.
There we
That's
go.
it. Spent a full hour on uh, have been recorded, and he didn't remember doing it.
Oh,
And he
that's
goes back.
crazy.
Yeah, he had no idea, but he goes back and he plays the thing, and sure enough, there he is, and he's jamming out with the. Yeah, I do try to keep something with. Anyways, questions, definitely questions.
Yeah, questions. Remember Sammy Jenkins asked for you, are you a naturally a night owl, or do you have to stay up to do that?
No, I'm naturally a night owl. My natural hours, I don't get tired until about 4 a.m. So it's very difficult for me to stay on a regular schedule, and I find my schedule just progresses back. If I'm not really actively focusing on it, it just goes back. When we had the kids, it was actually great because my wife and I could switch shifts. I'd go to bed at 4 a.m., she'd wake up and take over, and then so that worked out well.
Yeah, yeah, I can empathize. And let's see, someone asked me, where is it? It was Sav asked, what I like to write. I like to write science, fantasy, and fantasy. I like science fiction, particularly in the way that it is able to tackle head on very pressing social issues that are uncomfortable, but able to wrap them up into a package that we are comfortable viewing them. We are comfortable confronting them because it, instead of, the let's say the oppressed being looking like your neighbor and you having to confront your own issues, now it's a green or a purple alien all of a sudden, and you're able to, interact with that, with that idea, and then usually that tracks on to the way you feel about real world, issues. And that's one of the reasons I really like science fiction and like fantasy, because swords and armor and shit is just cool. Let's see. Um, XXXILD says, write longer than 4 hours at a time at your own peril. Um, Sav
I
says, go ahead.
Oh no, that there are. First of all, well, in terms of how memory works, it's interesting because you learn better with breaks in between. In terms of writing, I think that can on a be true for. I think that's probably true for most people most of the time. There are people for whom that's an exception. I There are books I've written that I really enjoyed, and that I think were very good, that were written 14 hours a day for three or 4 weeks and done. And
Mm,
that was early. That was before the kids. After the kids, it's harder. I do think your brain does get tired, just like anything else. Your brain actually, as an organ, consumes the most amount of energy of any other organ in your body, and it does need fuel. It needs rest, and if you don't get it, you do start to it the functionality starts to suffer. And yeah, going past 4 hours, but you can hit a manic state and all of a sudden boom. And I think creative people are much more prone to that sort of thing. I think that's sort of what Ansgar was describing earlier.
possibly, yeah.
Uh, yeah,
I have a question for you, and we've got some more
yeah.
questions lining up. So one of the things I've noticed is there's a lot of discussion these days about what makes, a good character, a bad character. And one of the things that's really difficult to write is a character who is overwhelmingly powerful and write them well. You know what I mean? From fantasy to comics to science fiction to a lot of different things, we have instances of characters who are just overwhelmingly powerful, and they can be very difficult to write. What would be some of your things to watch out for? And when we're writing a character like that, how do you write them without them coming across as, you know what some people would call a Mary Sue?
Whoa, that's a really good question. That's going to have a complex answer. That's a very good question. First of all, it depends on what you're writing for, who's your audience, and what you're trying to accomplish. A lot of times, people just write for themselves, and if you write for yourself, I also wrote a book called Playing God, and the book was about a writer. And I do equate writing to playing God because you do get to build your own worlds, whether it's science fiction, even if it's fiction, you're really kind of sorry, even if it's nonfiction, you're actually creating a world in one sense or another. It's from a particular perspective. So. Um, if you're just writing because you enjoy it and you want to commit your ideas to paper, you don't care who reads it, anything like that, do what you want. Do what you want. Do whatever makes you happy, man. Write however
Mhm.
you want. It's all yours. If you want something that people can connect with, that people are going to enjoy reading. And to me, that's important. That's one of the reasons I write. I think that it should, in general, be one of the more important goals in writing is to communicate in one way or another, even if it's metaphorically, even if it's however it is. In that case, you have to have characters that people can relate to. Even Hannibal Lecter, people could relate to in some ways. Um, if the character has no flaws whatsoever, they start to become unrelatable. I do think now. I think the Superman comic book is, in my view, kind of guilty of this. I think there are
Mhm.
still people who did enjoy it and related to it. I think there is some fantasy fulfillment, wish
Uh,
fulfillment.
a quick insertion in there though. There are some writers who did really well with the Superman character because they didn't make it about how powerful he was. It was a story about how to responsibly use that power. You know what I mean? And then there were moral conflicts over that power, which can be done well.
Well, and he was constantly being tested in one way or another, and usually he won without using that strength. Usually he
Mhm.
won with his brains or with his strength of character.
Right.
So I think there were other ways to make it relatable, but the ultimately any character that ends up being able to sort of wipe out anybody and everybody, you've got two problems. First of all, it's almost impossible to beat them without a Deus Ex Machina, which I will get into what that is in a second. And there are loads of the War of the Worlds ends with a Deus Ex Machina, and that's the only way it can end. The bad guys are so powerful in War of the Worlds. It's over. It's over. We've been wiped out, and then what? They got sick and died. Done.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think you need to one try to keep your characters relatable, and that means they have to have faults. They can't be that perfect. They can't be, and you end up with. And I think to Darth Vader was always in my mind one of the scariest characters ever made. But there were elements of him, he did struggle, and it wasn't just the struggle of, dark side, he was constantly being frustrated by elements around him. He definitely tried to give off the appearance of being, perfect, omniscient, omnipresent, and he
Right.
clearly wasn't. People could get around him. It just wasn't easy. But so I think your characters have to the temptation is to make your characters perfect in one way or another, a perfect good, perfect evil, and that fails almost universally. And I'll get into Deus Ex Machina at some point. And it's another thing Sammy Jenkins mentioned, but we can hit that whenever. Were you going to ask a question or?
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the things I think makes Vader, particularly before the prequels, I think the prequels actually did some significant damage to the vision of who Darth Vader is. But before that, one of the things that made him so incredible as a villain, so scary, is you knew almost nothing about him. You know what I
Yes,
mean? There was no
Joker.
face. Yeah, yeah. You couldn't even, and unlike the Joker, you couldn't even read his emotions. He that mask just kept everything hidden, and that was really good. That was really good. Really well done.
Yeah, there was the Joker was that way too. Somebody came up with a plausible history for um, uh, Nolan's Joker from Batman Returns, the Dark Knight trilogy, and I liked it. I thought it made a lot of sense that he was actually a war vet from Desert Storm. But having said that, it does take a lot of the fear out of it once you've humanized him.
Yeah.
So, and then two things. What is a Deus Ex Machina? A Deus Ex Machina literally means God from the machine. It's from ancient Greek plays where uh, all of life was about to end. All the good guys were about to lose, and then God comes down. A god, one of the Greek gods, would come down and fix everything for everybody. And for the ancient plays, they would have an actor on a swing or a pulley system, and they'd lower them down And so God would come down from the machine. There'd be a machine that would lower the God down. The God would say, "And I fixed everything for all of you." And then say, "Oh, wow, hey, we were all about to get wiped out, but now God's come down and fixed everything. Great." So a Deus Ex Machina is when a completely unrelated story element, one that just basically has nothing to do with what's been going on, comes down, fixes everything for everybody. Main bad guy's walking across the street and he's about to kill everybody. Poof, hit by a car. It's like, oh, hey, problem solved. Deus Ex
Right.
Machina. The War of the Worlds, aliens come down, invade Earth. They kick our asses as one would expect. And then it turns out none of them got the flu vaccine. And they all die. We win. That's a Deus Ex Machina. And that was actually Orwell. Not Orwell. That was Jesus
Uh,
fucking Christ.
let me look it up for you real quick.
What happens? Yeah, it was famous director Orson Welles. That was Orson Welles, which is amazing because that guy really knew how to write. But boy, did he screw
Yeah.
the pooch on that one. But that was also done live, and he scared the living daylights out of people. And half of the United States of America literally thought we were under invasion when that first came out. But that's a whole nother story.
Well, yeah. And the thing is the Deus Ex Machina can be used well. Like all things, there are some of these pitfalls that can be used well when a really good writer finds a really good interesting hook for it, but it's rare and you should still be wary of them in your own writing,
Mm,
you know.
yep. Oh,
Um
and yeah, I think he's right. I confused those. And then the only other one was the question about is a work ever complete or is it abandoned? All art, I think, suffers that problem. It's not just writing, and it's all art, and even I think nonfiction writing, which I would classify as an art. Um, and George Lucas had said this. I don't know where he got it from. My guess is it's been around for a while. Any art is never completed; it's only abandoned. And I certainly feel that way. I still go back and tinker with the Water Thief. The thing's already out there. It's won awards. And I was just like,
well,
yeah, but I could make this tighter.
let me just say that the most recent versions of the original Star Wars trilogy were released like 6 months ago. They did another edit with more updates,
Oh
so
God, yeah.
he kind of has lived by that
Yes, he did. And to everyone's detriment, I
yeah.
think it can be done well. Well, his other problem was he didn't have any checks and balances. There was
Yeah.
no once he could do whatever he wanted, and he didn't really have the skill to live that way. So
Um Mikey does have a question. He wonders if writing as a whole has been weakened since so few people read these days.
excellent question. I'll get to that in a second. Also, Sammy Jenkins asks, "Have I ever written fiction?" Yeah, the Water Thief was fiction. It's the one I'm actually most known for. That was
I'm about
a
halfway through that, by the way. Very
oh
good.
my God. Oh well, thank you. So the Water Thief is a rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It's a near future dystopia. Takes place sometime after the environment has gone to hell and most of the population's dead and the world is
It's
mostly
very
frozen
uplifting.
tundra. And it's a feel good book. Um, yeah, and people are getting thrown into live vats and turned into soap, but that's a whole nother thing. So that's that. Yes, I've written plenty of fiction before. In fact, I've got a whole bunch of short stories. But I'm sorry. And then what was the? Oh yes, that's a good question. It depends on how you define writing. I think people are losing writing skills. I think to some extent they are becoming somewhat less important, but I think it's going to be where the people who do it well are going to shine better and those individuals are going to become more important because you're always, I think, going to want to have people who can write and write well, but I think there's less of a need for it right now, and so there are fewer people doing it. You can find that book, by the way, on Amazon, and you can also find a couple other things I've done on Amazon. So it's Amazon, Nicholas Lamar Soutter, The Water Thief. I think that storytelling is always going to be extraordinarily important. And so if you consider any form of storytelling as writing, I think there's a way to make that argument. I think it depends on how you define writing and what you mean by the language and by the terms. But then no, writing isn't suffering at all. There
Right.
are people constantly coming up with new stories. We will always have a demand for new stories, and perhaps it's actually becoming more important for a number of reasons. We have more people on the planet. We have more media than ever. They need writers for game. I mean, games now have writers that write the
Let
whole thing out 6 months before they start.
let me tell
So
you something. If anybody, including you, Nick, wants to play a game that is just amazingly, masterfully written. I mean, we're talking about the deconstruction of a character in just one of the most beautiful ways. Red Dead Redemption 2. I can't
oh yeah,
say
yeah.
enough.
I'd like to look into that, and that's a perfect example. So that's obviously written now. It wasn't.
Yeah,
It didn't come across as writing because the skill of the writer in terms of properly using grammar, in terms of conveying an idea in a sentence, and yada yada yada, which is what we normally think of as writing. Yeah, that may not have been quite as important or utilized, but it was scripted. It was written, and somebody sat down and wrote the story. So I think writing is in many ways becoming more important, but the actual craft of writing is dying out a bit. I don't think it's ever going to be dead. We're always going to need it, but it's
it's
becoming less and less.
certainly changing forms on a larger scale. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
you know. The visual arts are changing too. Like very few people still draw with a pencil on a page. You know what I mean? Very few people actually make oil pigments and paint on a canvas. Most people do that digitally now. It doesn't mean that visual art skills are dying. It just means they're kind of transforming to the new, what's popular.
yeah, yeah. I think I would do that. So, how much research would you consider doing for a fictional work? The research is sometimes the most fascinating part for me because I love learning new things. Uh, it really depends on the work. Oh wow, yeah. There's no single answer to that. Um, I think that research is important. I did editing for a while, and there was a guy who did a book. It was a very creative book, and I think he still has me down as an editor. It's like, well, no, I wasn't. I was a freelance editor. That's different than being your editor. And I think he had some issues with that. But in the book, it was actually kind of like Inception before Inception even was a thing. He'd written this book, and these kids at an orphanage learn to sort of go into a dream state and have combat in dreams with an unknown assailant who turns out to be the guy who's running the orphanage, who's using dreams to try to. So it's a long story, but in it, at one point, they're they're worried that these machines are going to crash. These computers that have everyone plugged in them are going to crash, and they've got these hard drives that are filling up too quickly with data and all this other stuff. And the his knowledge of computers was woefully lacking, and he was just throwing in sort of just enough about computers to make it sound that he knew what he was talking about. But really, anybody who knows anything about computers is going to sit there and say, "Okay, this no, this doesn't make any sense, and I'm out of it." There's something called suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief is this really unique phenomenon where you forget that it's fiction. And in fact, that you forget, fiction or not, you forget that it's not happening right now. People go to movies, they'll go to a horror movie, and they will have a heart attack. Think about this for a second, okay? They're watching something projected onto a white screen. They know it's not real. They're sitting in a theater. They may even have some popcorn. People are next to them. Freddy Krueger comes out and he's got all these claws. They know the actor. They've seen the actor in interviews. They know that's makeup. They can still get so scared they have a heart attack. Why? Because they're actually, part of them is actually living it. That is suspension of disbelief. They are so immersed in it that they think it's happening right now. The goal is suspension of disbelief. It's to get people into it and to stay into it. Once that's achieved, the slightest misstep pulls people out. Sometimes it's a misspelling, sometimes it's any kind of grammatical error can do it, but also errors in the world that you've built. So I am doing the one I'm doing on uh, the book on Italy post just or during World War II Italy, and the Nazi hunter who is chasing Nazis. I had to do a phenomenal amount of research on precisely how that's done, so that people can look at this and feel like it's really happening. That's also called verisimilitude. It's when you read something and it smacks of truth. It has that feel to it like it's real. Nonfiction, or sorry, fiction should still read as if, in some ways, it's nonfiction. It doesn't have to read like it's put together by a journalist. It doesn't have to read like that, but it should read like it's actually real and happening, and that there is an understanding in it, with the exception of some experimental work. It should feel like it is real, it's happening, and you're involved. And in order to do that, you have to you can't make a work that appeals to everybody. You can't make a work that everybody's going to stay in once it starts. But you want as many people to stay in it as possible, and most of that is research. It's knowing the times, places, the dates. For The Water Thief, there was a lot of research. I already knew a good deal about economics, but I had to learn more. Research into what would likely happen if society crumbled, how would people function, and a tremendous amount of research, so that when you read it, you say, wow, this feels like it's really happening.
And then
So,
Neil
and I
deGrasse
enjoy it.
Tyson comes out and tells you that the stars weren't in the proper places and the moon wasn't in the proper place and why your book is wrong.
Neil deGrasse Tyson came out onto Colbert Report and said, or no, it was the Daily Show, I think. And you know how they got the spinning planet on the Daily Show,
Oh
just
yeah.
right over the thing. He comes out and says, "You realize that's spinning wrong?" It's just like, son of a.
Yeah, he's the ultimate like spoiler of movies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's see. Orwell feared, or were those who ban books, how quickly feared that there'd be no reason to ban books, and no one. Yeah, that's an interesting. I think Kimo Maki had actually given another uh, thing that I'd forgotten. The other thing is, and well, we probably have. Well, we sort of have time for it. Yeah, we do. On drafting, which I've spoken with about. Mikey had asked me about earlier, and the importance of drafting, but no, that's that could be its own show.
Since we've been talking about characters, I've got a question. What are your
Yeah,
feelings on archetypal characters?
I am a big fan of archetypal characters. I think there's a reason they work, and that's sort of what an archetype is by definition. The how and why we have a lot of debates and discussions over, but I think archetypal imagery works very, very well. I think what doesn't appear to be archetypal, if you take a look at what we like about it, you'll find it usually is archetypal. Get back to Darth Vader. Well, that was all of Star Wars was the original trilogy was in fact steeped in archetypal imagery. But
Well, I mean, the whole thing was basically the hidden fortress, but with, lasers.
yeah, yes. Well, that was the other thing. Well, okay, genre, genre. Do you know what genre 1984 was?
Mm, not exactly, no.
Science fiction.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, that's the genre. That's where you'll find it. You'll find it in the science fiction. Yeah, but that's the appropriate response. Now,
Hmm.
what genre was Star Wars? Well, I get kind of offended when people say Star Wars is science fiction, at least the
Oh, it's
original trilogy.
not, no, no.
I don't think of it. The science fiction is the setting, but it could have just as easily been in feudal Japan. In fact, the original version was in feudal Japan.
Well, if you look at the original poster, with Darth Vader on it, his lightsaber even has a katana guard on it. Um, but yeah, I consider it science fantasy, is what I would call it. Some people call it space opera, but I call it science fantasy because it's even the science fiction part isn't really science fiction. They, especially before the prequels, they never went out of their way to explain how any of the science works. It
Yeah,
just does. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
yeah.
It's not in most science fiction, especially there's what's called hard science fiction and soft science fiction. This is soft science fiction. It's not like Asimov, which is hard science fiction. But a lot of soft science fiction is very hard to tell what what genre it's in. But okay, look, if it happens in the future, it's science fiction. That's usually just sort of the default bar you have to clear. 1984 happens in the future. Precisely when, nobody knows what happens in the future. It doesn't matter that there's no futuristic technology. It doesn't matter that, in fact, technology has regressed. It's in the future, so it's science fiction. So I think when it comes to genres, we do like to have genres. Booksellers demand genres. People want genres. They say they don't, but really they do. If you're a mystery fan, you like mysteries. If you like romance novels, you like romance novels. So I think we do have them, but you start to get into difficulties with what really belongs where, especially with the good stuff, which usually starts to go through. And now I think I was going to relate this to, oh yeah, archetypes. I think most of the good work has significant archetypal imagery in it of some kind. I can't think of anything that wasn't archetypal that was really clearly, in my view, a success on a either a personal level for me or just commercially. I can't think of anything that may be out there, but I'll bet you there's archetypal imagery in there somewhere, and that's what does it.
Kimomaki said, I think of it as Western. Now, there's actually a good reason that you do that. The vast majority of in fact, the Western genre was built on the back of great Japanese classic movies. The so-called Mexican standoff is based off of Japanese cinema. Some of the greatest westerns ever made were actually direct translations of movies like Yojimbo, Sanjuro, and Samurai 7. The Magnificent Seven is the Seven Samurai, just set in the West instead of the East. So yeah, there's actually a reason that it feels very much like a Western.
And this gets us actually into another, are there rules to writing, which is a very common question. And you get people who say yes, you get people who say no. It's complicated. The answer is yes. Um, oh, come on, that was funny. The answer really is, I think, for the most part, yes. Again, it depends on how you define writing and what you're talking about. But the reality is, I mean, listen, there are rules for
Are they
grammar. There are
rules
rules.
or more like guidelines?
I think they're a bit more like guidelines, but they're also
Yeah.
a bit more like rules. Um, because I mean, look, there are rules for English and there are rules for grammar. And one of the things I say is grammar exists for a very specific reason. Grammar exists to aid in communication. There are times when violating the rules of grammar will actually improve your communication. It's not as rare as you might think, but it isn't admittedly all that common. But there have been people who come to me and said, okay, well, look, I've got this sentence here, but if I use the correct grammar in the sentence, people won't understand what I'm saying. If I use the incorrect grammar, they will. So, okay, use the incorrect grammar. The grammar is there to help you communicate accurately, and if it's getting in the way of that, then violate the rules of grammar, as they are so-called. Just break them. Okay, well, gee, then they're guidelines. Well, they're not really guidelines because guidelines, you can sort of break a lot more often, and in general, you should stick to these rules. They are breakable, but only when you're still trying to make the purpose of improving communication. So I think they're more than guidelines, but they are less than rules. I don't know that we have um, grammar bakes great cakes too. Yeah, or what is it? Fruit flies like an orange. No, no, sorry. Time flies like an arrow. Fruit flies like a banana. Um, so there are rules to pacing. There are rules to developing good characters. There are rules to a great many things about writing, and for the most part, you should follow them. There are people who have successfully broken those rules, but it's one of those. It's like the bootstrapper. It's like the single black guy who was born in the most abject poverty and pulls himself up from his bootstraps and you know becomes a major success, and people sit there and say, oh well, you see, A, racism is over because he was able to do it, and B, there is no poverty is not an issue. Even somebody with the
Anyone can do it. Yeah.
anyone can do it. No, most 99% of people just can't. The reality is 99% of the time you really should stick to and follow these rules. If learn the rules first, then break them. And too many people also sit there and I say, well, no, you shouldn't do this for the following reasons. And like, well, there are no rules to writing. Oh, Jesus, fuck. Yes, there are rules to writing. And if you want to break them, fine. Learn what they are first, break them. Monet broke the rules of painting. Monet broke a lot of the rules of painting. So did Rembrandt. That's why they're famous. That's why they're good. They knew the rules first. Monet became a master painter painting the traditional way first and then said, this is how I'm going to do it. But he knew what he was doing. And he didn't violate a lot of rules about color, contrast, composition. No, it was different, but still followed 99% of the rules, actually.
Right.
So there are rules to writing, and you can break them, but you should know what they are, and you should break them deliberately, and you should know what you're doing, and you shouldn't break them out of ignorance. And you need to learn what
And
they are,
not
and that
just
takes practice.
deliberately, there should be a damn good reason that you're doing it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And you're not just breaking the rules because I want to break the rules. You got to be breaking the rules because it serves your story or your characters in some way.
And we had this question. I was on a stream with Mikey, and it was somebody had brought up first person omniscient, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. I'm not entirely sure how you do it, but I have to believe there are experimental pieces that have done it. And I tried to look it up. I couldn't find examples of someone who had done it, but I found examples of people saying it's been done. So, okay, well, first person omniscient, first of all, is almost a non sequitur. And second of all, really does violate a number of rules, not only of writing, but of reality, as far as I understand reality. Could it be done, especially in an experimental piece, something maybe Jacob's Ladder-esque, something, really out there? Maybe, and that would be interesting. I mean, there are some
I could
works of
see actually imagine a Terry Pratchett book where he put you in the mind of basically God, right? And
okay,
yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah, I could
There you
see it.
go. There you go. You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, God would write a first person omniscient book. Yes, he would.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
It would be a little hard to keep up with, though, realistically speaking, but okay.
It
I
would.
like it.
But then again, Terry Pratchett, he does well with stories that are kind of hard to keep up with and they're kind of all over the place, but still really good and pointed and, have something to say.
This is the kind of English with which I will not put up, not put, with actually, I think it was will not put up, but yeah, the Winston Churchill ending in a preposition. Prepositions are something you should never end a sentence with. Um, it is, one should never, oh God, I have, what I need to do now is I have a book I used for when I was teaching. Just had a whole bunch of material in it, but had the 21 rules of I should read. Let me read. I'm sure that this will 21. All right. Uh, let me see if I can find the 21 rules of grammar. And oh, I think I found 11 by Oxford. This is probably. Oh, yep. This is what I'm looking for. Let's see. No, this isn't. Oh, so let's see. A preposition is a thing never to end a sentence with was one of the rules. And one should never start a sentence with a conjunction was the next rule. Let me just find, so I've got a folder of my business and craft of writing, and it's got a worksheet, because I used to teach a free workshop on this, and I would have, anyone could come in. The thing is, as a writer, there's a couple of things that writers face. The first is writers have phenomenal insecurity about their own writing, and the reason is because we don't get cards. You want to become a mechanic, you get a card. You know when you're a mechanic. You've taken the classes, you do the work, you get licensed. Boom, you get a card. Same thing with a doctor, same thing with a lawyer. You get a card, says you're a lawyer, you're a mechanic. We don't get cards as writers. And you can say, well, gee, you're published. Doesn't that mean you're a writer? Actually, no. A lot of writers struggle with imposter syndrome, which is a psychological condition where you think you're completely unqualified to do whatever it is you're doing. And that's actually kind of the high end of Dunning-Kruger, which is the better people get at things, the more they realize how they're not that good, and they can see their own faults, and they start to think, wow, if I screw up in the slightest, everybody's going to see my faults and it's all over, man, it's all over. And there were, Johnny Carson suffered that. He was one of the funniest men ever, and he's sitting there going, I'm going to walk out onto that stage one day and people are going to realize I'm not funny. I mean, he was terrified of that. So it's called imposter syndrome, and it happens especially in areas where you don't have uh, some kind of independent verification to establish uh, your level. And success as a writer isn't necessarily it doesn't qualify. And what constitutes success anyway is a whole nother. Uh,
Well, and what constitutes success in any artistic field can be completely a matter of cultural trends. It's entirely subjective. So no matter how many people like your book or don't like your book, you can't really, there's no objective standard you can point to say my work is good.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. The closest I think the closest you can come with is in nonfiction, where you can sit there and say, what are the ideas that you're trying to transmit, and have you successfully transmitted them? So I think in nonfiction journalistic work, stuff like that, and
Right.
that's one. And I'm critical of some journalists and some nonfiction writers out there, because I sit there and say, okay, you've got a sentence here. I think you were trying to say ABC. You have failed in all of those objectives. So I don't think you're doing a particularly good job. But I think that's easier to do with fiction than nonfiction.
So
But now I've
speaking,
forgotten.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, yeah.
speaking of which, when you write a character, when you write a person
Mhm.
in nonfiction, like you're doing a real historical work, do you approach that from the same way that you write a fictional character?
Oh, good question. No, um, there ends up being a lot more research involved, and I think you have to try to maintain some fidelity to who that person was. I think you owe that just as a human being to other human beings, and there have been times when I've been writing nonfiction, and especially if I'm writing an essay and it happens to be on a person, especially if it's on a person who's alive, there's always okay, there's always the attempt to try to maintain fidelity to who or what they are and what they've said, and trying to keep any agenda out of it. With the fact that if you're writing it, there's probably an agenda, or else you wouldn't be writing it in the first place.
Right.
And people are very, very complex, and this is a good thing and a bad thing. But what that means is, so okay, I'd spoken at one point earlier about Ulysses S. Grant. Who was Ulysses S. Grant? One of the greatest generals in American history. He was also a drunk. I mean, just a drunk, not an alcoholic. He was a fucking drunk. Which of those is true? Well, they both are. And most people are liars, and they're honest, and they're thieves, and they have integrity. And it's a question of what set of circumstances and what for. Everybody will commit murder under the right set of circumstances. They may or may not consider it murder, but they would slay another human being under the right set of circumstances. If you choose to cast the person based on what they did on any one day in their life, you pick the right day, you can turn anyone into a villain. And if that's what you're looking to do, it's pretty easy. And most of us, if we have an agenda, we're looking to do that whether we're aware of it or not. So with a um, with a historical figure, I try to look at what's most human about them. I try to look at what their biggest failings were and their biggest successes were, and speak to those. And I think those extremes are what are going to make the person interesting. I don't think we're going to be interested in the moderates of history. It's the people who are extreme in one way or another that get things done. I do think you want to be able to make them connectable. Adolf Hitler was an artist,
Hmm.
not a
Not
great
a
one, but he wasn't
terrible
bad
artist,
either.
but not a bad one either. He was competent. He's got a couple
He was
works
competent, yeah.
that are rather attractive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's important to know. I think that's if you're going to talk about Hitler, I think frankly you should mention that as well.
Yeah.
I would very much rather he was a monster. I would very much rather he was not a human being. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. He was part of the same species I am. So I
It's
think
nice
it
to
helps everybody to.
envision people who have done such horrible things as people we could never be because they are not human. But in reality, in the right set of circumstances, any one of us could be that monster.
Yep. So when I'm writing fiction, the upside is if I write I don't have to worry about the feelings of the person I'm writing to, and I don't have to worry about what I do to them because they exist in my mind. And if I want to make them good, if I want to make them bad, I can make them whatever I want to. Again, playing God, I can do whatever I want to with that person. I can still do that with a real person, actually, because if I have an agenda, I can turn Barack Obama into a horrible, horrible human being. We've seen it done. Actually, there are plenty of people who've written
Fox
reasonably
News.
accurately on that. What? Fox
I
News.
was just
Yeah,
Fox News, yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
So it isn't that hard to do if you're looking to do it, but there you have to check yourself. You have to be much more present,
Mhm.
and you have to try to get across what you're saying, but also try to be as fair as possible. And you have to realize it's going to have consequences no matter what you do. So I approach it very, very differently.
Got it. Got it. Um, because I've never written. I've written quite a bit of fiction, but I've not ever written any nonfiction. So that really fascinates me, especially since that's your favorite thing to write. Um, when you're writing for a nonfiction character, it has to be difficult to strike the balance between keeping the book entertaining because you have to still, a non-entertained audience is not an engaged one, but staying true to this, real life human being. How do you balance that? How do you make sure that that's working?
um, a sense of presence and constantly checking. But at some point, that's where skill and craft comes in. This is a craft, and it comes down to opinion. That's about it. If you're good at it and you've been doing it a while, you will get so that you're more and more accurate over time and in whatever you're doing. But there's no way to know for certain, and somebody's always going to disagree, and oftentimes the subject of it. Recently, a buddy of ours got into a kerfuffle um, with someone, and it's with someone I'm not a huge fan of, and I've in fact more than once outright accused of lying. And I have to be careful because when I write about this person, if I think they're a liar going in, well, first of all, I can paint them as a liar really easily, no matter what the truth is. And second of all, the fact that I already have an opinion going in is going to paint it. I can't remove that. I can try to remove it, and I do try to remove it. And I think when people are looking at my work, they say, wow, this was fair and balanced. And that leads credence to it. So what I say to myself is, if this person is who I think they are, that should come out if I look at it objectively. So look at it objectively, realizing that's how I'm going to write the best and most powerful piece. Now, we did this segment on non sequitur, and to date, that's one of our more popular pieces. And people on the non sequitur thing said that they thought it was extraordinarily well balanced, and people on both sides were
Yeah.
saying we did well on that. Well, we do have an opinion, and we have an opinion as to really sort of what went on back there. But by presenting this as fairly and honestly as possible, people are going to be, if our opinion is correct, people are more likely to land on that opinion with us. So if you think you're right, do the best job you can to be as objective as possible, realizing you'll never fully succeed.
Oh wow. Um, how interested would you be in working in mediums that you haven't worked in before, like maybe writing a story for a comic or a movie or a television show?
I wanted to do comics. I did. Then I found out I really couldn't draw. Maybe I could have learned to draw with enough, but I drew a couple of comics, and yeah, I know. I did a few superhero comics, and I loved it, and I enjoyed it, but I got very demoralized with it, and then I started writing another. But I would love to. I've written a couple of screenplays.
Okay.
1, 2, well, literally a couple, 2 screenplays, and I've done some screen work, but not a whole heck of a lot.
Mhm.
I'd like to. I enjoy it. And my favorite writer, one of my favorite writers, I have a number of favorite writers. My favorite, probably my single favorite book of all time would be Lord of the Flies. But one of my favorite writers of all time is Aaron Sorkin, and he, of course, is a television writer and Broadway writer. But he's a writer, and he is very fucking good, much better than he gets credit for. Stephen King also is much better than he gets credit for because he's written a lot of
I
shit
agree.
nobody knows. I mean, Shawshank Redemption, he wrote that. People are like, what? Yes, he wrote The Green Mile. He wrote Stand By Me.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh,
you
he's
know,
absolutely excellent.
yep. So I think, but writers are writers. Aaron Sorkin is one of my favorite writers of all time. In fact, Milch is also one of my favorites. That's an Aaron Sorkin show. That is a David Milch show, and incredible characters, incredible dynamics, and the genuine conflict while still having very nice, good people. I'll tell you the only other one. This is so 80s. This is a television show I grew up with, but
All right.
still to this day reminds me of, I think, one of the best, some of the best writing I've ever seen was a show called Airwolf.
Oh my
And
God, are you kidding?
no,
Airwolf? Oh
yeah,
man. Okay, okay. I'm listening. I'm
but
listening.
I'm talking only the first season.
Okay.
It got completely, and Millennium actually was very good too. They were both very dark. It was very dark, especially for the first. I will show you the season premiere of Airwolf, and you see that, and yeah, I mean it's 80s, it's campy, but it was amazing what those characters were going through. And one of the most amazing pieces of it was Airwolf was this helicopter, really fancy helicopter. It was produced by this super secret CIA organization. It got stolen by the manufacturer, the guy who built it. He stole it. They hired one of the test pilots to steal it back. He steals it back, but then he keeps it. And he says, I will give it back to you if you find my brother. He was lost in Vietnam, so on and so forth. This company says, all right, but if you use it for us as if it was ours, we'll help you evade the rest of the government, the authorities, so on and so forth. So we'll help you. But here's the problem. They want to steal it back from him. So he can't trust a single thing they do, but he has to trust them because they're the only ones keeping him out of jail. They will try to get that back at any cost, but if they fail even once in any major effort to get it back, he never speaks to them again and they need him. So everybody is a good guy. Everybody has sort of good motives. This thing actually belongs to that company, but the guy stole it, but he stole it because he wants them to find his brother because of and so you end up with, they all have really good motives and you could understand why they're doing everything they are, but they will stab each other in the back at the first chance they get. They can't trust each other. And there's almost this visceral, even hatred for what's going on, despite the fact they also have a profound respect for each other. That's a very difficult dynamic to set up and to maintain. Now that got all thrown to hell after, but the first couple of episodes, in particular, where you just had that, and the pilot, I think, would blow you away if you saw most people never.
I've
Um,
seen that. But it was years ago, years and years ago.
yeah.
All right, all right. Here's a question: your favorite fictional character?
Oh Jesus, I'm still probably too waking up too much to think of my favorite fictional character. Donald Trump.
Unfortunately, he's real.
I don't know if he's real or if it's just, I think someone took a tangerine slathered sunblock on him and just rolled him out there, put a little wig on. I think it's fictional, but I could be wrong. But what was the book about the fictional candidate? I don't know. My favorite fictional character. Wow, that's a really good one. I can't even think about that. No, I can't. Although I don't know why. It's not the dog in what was but I did think about this just because we've been talking about first person. Talk about great writing. Jack London wrote a book. Well, it was a short story, but about a dog in the first person.
Interesting.
That skill. That was, and I want to say it's. Call of the Wild. Um,
Let's see, who was it that did this? It was Robert T. Backer wrote a book I was absolutely in love with called Raptor Red, and it was a book. It was a book in the first person of a velociraptor in the dinosaur era.
Ooh. Yeah, you see, I mean, imagine all of a sudden you've got no language that you can use. I mean, they have to communicate, but they communicate without
Mm-hmm.
language as we think, without words. It that takes some fucking skill. I can't. I'm sort of looking at my own to try to figure out. I mean, I'm sure if I thought about who was my favorite um, fictional character, I can't. I mean, I'm sure one will jump out at me at some point, but I can't think of one right now.
That's what the in time Twitter is for and stuff like that.
Yeah, the Discord, and well, this is,
Yeah.
we did this early because I'm going to be unfortunately preoccupied all day, so I haven't had a really chance to. I mean, I managed to shave and shower because I wanted to smell good for the show, which I don't think it really matters, but fine. At least I look good. Um, but
There are people in the chat saying that we should do a comic together. I'm working on a comic with heavy cyberpunk themes. Just saying.
what was the I did have one cyberpunk idea that I've been interested in, but it's been so long. And I haven't written. One of the things that happened was oh boy, I had co-authored the memoir of a prison psychologist. So imagine being a psychologist to the worst possible human beings you can imagine: murderers, rapists.
Hmm.
Got to meet one. This was hilarious because I forget who. No, now I remember. There was a troll online who really got mad at me and started to threaten me. And I was just like, okay. The last person to really make any threats to me had murdered 14 people. Um, yeah, and pleasant enough guy, actually. You'd have no idea talking to him. You would have no idea, sweetheart, talking to him. I was like, really? You murdered 14? Oh, well, that's only the ones they know about. Probably
Oh
closer to
Jesus!
28 or so. But it's like, and the one that he got in, the one he got in most trouble for was a 2-year-old baby that he
Oh, that's
burned alive. And this guy is just a sweetheart. I mean, you would have no idea. He also tried to murder someone in prison, his best friend in prison, which turns out he wasn't his friend. He had taken a hit job on the guy and then became friends with him, was friends with him for 6 months just to get close enough, and was like giving him food, giving him money, like, oh, you're a great guy. And then all of a sudden gets him alone. Sweetheart. Okay, so this guy, now the good news is he's still in Supermax, but wants me dead, wants my family dead, I'm sitting there going, yeah. So it's like that. He was the last one to threaten me. That's a high bar.
yeah.
But
You gotta cross a pretty high bar to get to you.
that guy, it was the memoir of a prison psychologist, and he ended up trying to steal the work, and he and I were partners, and it ended up going very, very south. And I lost a number of agents that were friends of mine and willing to represent this work, a few other works, and he was insane. He also started bullying journalists who like misspelled his name in print or something. And I was like, this was on purpose, man. I was like, it wasn't on purpose. Okay, you need to. I was doing serious damage to my reputation. Then he tries to republish the book without my name on it. In fact, you can find it out there without my name on it. So I don't know. Ever since then, I've had a hard time really writing a book again. I haven't reestablished my career on there. Like I said, I lost a lot of friends. I have an agent who's representing me right now. She's a very good agent, and I enjoy it. But it's just like it requires a tremendous amount of work and investment. And I lost so much when this guy just went. I mean, he's insane. And he really did damage to my reputation. Partnered with the wrong guy, and it's difficult. Yeah, that's it. Confessions of a Sin Eater. Um, or so, and then that was 2 years. That was 2 years full time, and we can't sell that book right now. So it's been hard for me to get back on the wagon of really writing. I've got a number of books I'd like to write. I'd love to, I did have a cyberpunk one that I wanted to. In fact, one of the things that I do is I've got all these bookshelves here. You can't see most of them, but one of the things I really liked was now I used to play some D&D. Definitely, I was a DM. But the other thing I did was there was a game called GURPS, which never really took off. But we had been talking about research. And one of the things that was really amazing about GURPS was a lot of the books that they had could be used as research. GURPS would allow for role playing in almost any genre you could possibly want. And the GURPS Cyberpunk, I should have the book over here, although I can't find it. I can't find anything right now. But that had a whole set of rules for how to play a role playing in a cyberpunk genre. And it gave you all sorts of guidelines you could use. And then you could go do your own thing from that. But if you started out there, it gave you a good sort of just starting point to work from. So I've got all, oh, there it is.
I
There you
remember
go.
GURPS. I played quite a bit of it.
Oh, okay. So then you know what these books are, but then so this was actually seized by the this was the one of their cyberpunk manuals. But
Yeah.
if you wanted to, the interesting thing about that was you could go look into that. And since role playing is essentially storytelling, and that's why I always wanted to be a DM. I always DM'd. Greatly preferred being a DM to actually playing. And I think the reason was I liked telling the stories. And I think that's part of why I got good at it, was because you had to tell the stories. You had to have genuine peril for the characters, but you also couldn't just get them wiped out right away, or else nobody would want to stay with the story. So there was a lot of story crafting involved. The Night Stewart, try not to take care, stay away from those fires, man.
Seriously.
So those, I've got like all those books. The GURPS Space was actually a very good reference for how to write how to write space role-playing games, but that translates into writing books, anything like that. And it would talk a lot about the science. It would talk about how the science was accurate, what parts were accurate that would work really well in a campaign, and what wouldn't. And so what was I going to say? I found those resources very useful. I do have a cyberpunk story that I'd been working on. Oh, wow. There was one guy. There's a couple people that actually had. One of the nice things about teaching this is you get to meet a lot of people who have lots of interesting stories. And one of my favorite writers was a very good science fiction writer who came to my workshop a lot. His name was Nick also. And I'm hoping he gets his stuff
That's a
published,
really
because he has
strange
some really
name,
good
Nick
stuff.
also. Happy New Year.
Han, do we have the vodka? No, just a bottle. Bottle's fine. That's good. I'll be on a minute. You were saying.
Oh no, you were saying. It's just a strange name. Nick also. I mean, that's a
that is what is called a dangling modifier joke for people who really want to be geeky about it.
which sounds dirty as hell. I'm just saying.
It does. It's a dangling the modifiers.
Yeah. You want to play with
How
my
low does it
dangling
dangle?
modifier?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, wow, we didn't, get actually all that in depth into any one thing, but we covered a lot.
Well, this lays a great foundation for beginning your lessons and doing specific workshops on specific things, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think there would be great benefit to that. I've also been wanting to do it on my own channel. I set up the framework for it and got everything I needed to done, but I'm not on my own channel anymore. I'm here most of the time. If I'm going to do it, just do it here.
Well, there's a good format for it here too. I mean, we got an awesome audience, and I enjoy being able to ask you these questions. And as you know, I do amateur writing. I consider myself an amateur because I haven't taken any proper courses, but I seem to have a talent for it, considering I've done a lot of DMing, and I've gotten a lot of over the last 20 years of DMing, I've gotten a lot of positive responses, and the people who have read what little I've written seem to enjoy it. So, but I look forward to learning more.
I think DMing, I think I probably, because that's where my background started with. DMs I trust sort of most for writers. Now, in terms of, and keep in mind, there is a difference between a writer and a storyteller. J.K. Rowling is actually a rather poor writer. She just is. She is a spectacular
She
storyteller. That
also
story is going to be
stole.
around.
She also stole Harry Potter.
Yeah, there's I've heard about that,
Yeah,
but
movie. You guys, if you want to see a really funny movie, it's called Troll, and it's a movie about a young kid named Harry Potter who meets a kindly old witch who has to teach him magic because a evil wizard is coming back into the world who was destroyed ages ago and is going to destroy the world. I'm not kidding.
yeah, I think I remember that. I haven't had a chance to look into it, but
Mhm,
she her first book was pretty well, not pretty well. It was the best written of all of them.
mhm.
The writing gets worse as it progresses, and the final one was just atrocious. Oh my God, you can just open it up anywhere and just find terrible writing anywhere and everywhere. One of the reasons is because once you're successful, there's less of a bar as to what people will publish. And everyone always says this, why is the person's breakout novel usually their best? The breakout novel is the novel that uh, is the one that makes them famous, not necessarily their first one, but the one that makes them famous. Why is the breakout almost always the best? The reason is because after it's done, the pressure goes up to produce more work and the pressure goes down to maintain the quality. That first one, you're trying to get it published, and as agents are saying, no, 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 you're just rewriting, 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 rewriting. So it's going to be the best. And that's where Harry Potter is the best written of the entire series. The worst written is the last one, which was just, I mean, it's endless. They're in the woods, everybody's, and she repeats herself. She'll say the same thing in 3 sentences, and then in 2 following paragraphs, say the same thing again. And it's just like, that's phenomenally poor writing. But she's an excellent storyteller. For the best writers, I think in general do tend to engage actively in their storytelling when they started out, and that's usually DMs, stuff like that. DMs, a dungeon master, or somebody who runs a role playing game for a group of people. And that's a trial by fire, because if you screw that up too many times, people will quit. Nobody will want to play with you. And there are ways to screw it up. Giving everybody what they want screws it up. Taking away everything they want screws it up. It's a constant balance. And it's this exact same balance you have in any kind of storytelling. So yeah, I always
And you have
go with.
to, and the way I like to play is, full immersion, full storytelling. You know, I've played in games that focus on like the combat and the numbers and the dice rolling, and those just aren't as fun to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do
All right. Well, I so no, I think that's about. Um,
you have any
I,
advice for somebody who wants to, before we go, who wants to actually get published? And also, do you have any advice for someone who wants to try and self-publish?
they're two very different things. I would avoid self-publishing unless you know what you're doing and have a very specific reason for doing it. And there are very good specific reasons for doing it, but you have to know what they are. Um, Once you're self-published, the bar for getting traditional published goes up dramatically, and
Mhm.
self-published usually doesn't have a lot of respectability, and usually that's justifiable. Um, I say write 10 minutes a day every day. And I had said earlier, writers don't have cards, so you don't know what constitutes a writer. I have a general rule of thumb. If you write for 10 minutes a day, every day for a year, maybe miss one or two because of some extenuating circumstances, I'll call you a writer. That's phenomenally hard to do. Most people can't do that. You should be writing every day if you want to be a writer. And that's what a writer is. I forget who it was, but somebody had said a true artist reveals that craft in everything they do. A true writer is always writing, and they're always writing in their head. They're writing their. I mean, I'm narrating in my head the whole time. I'm sitting there going, okay, how would I write this? How would I? And every time I read, I'm correcting everything I read at all times. And I'm sitting there going, okay, if I reworded this, how could I say the exact same thing with 3 fewer words and easier to read with better clarity? And I just do that, done. And I'm always doing that. Be doing that all the time. Always be creating characters. Look at people and observe things. Who's got interesting character traits? Who's got a lot of the best characters I've ever written were based on people that existed, not necessarily one person. Sometimes it was an amalgam, but I would sit there and I would try to understand what are traits that I've seen before that I found fascinating, and then take those. Winston Churchill is a phenomenal character. Take some elements of him, take elements of the best and worst of people and put them together, and you're going to have a great character. So always be thinking in those terms. But like I said, I've been out of it for a little while, and a little while I mean years, which for a writer not necessarily means much. I still write. I still try to write the fiction when I get a chance, but or nonfiction. But I've been so busy too. So
My definitely where the one place I sort of naturally gravitate to in writing is character development. And one of the things I do almost every single day is continually imagine how this character would react in whatever real world situation that I'm observing, witnessing, seeing what's going on. It happens naturally. I don't even seek out to do it. It's just I'm always thinking, how would this character react in this situation? You know?
well, and that's because you love it, and that's the other thing. If somebody wants to be a writer, well, first question I'd ask them is, why aren't you right now? In my mind, a writer is more a frame of mind. If you're a good writer or a bad writer, that's a different thing. But a writer is a frame of mind. And if you're a writer, you're always thinking in terms of writing. You're always thinking in terms of your art. You're always thinking in terms of character creation. So you already are those things. You couldn't stop it if you wanted to. So if you're not a writer yet, what's holding you back? Why aren't you? And why do you want to be? If it's because you want to be famous, I think that's probably there was a woman I met once, and I remember I was in a workshop, one of the first workshops I ever attended, and the woman running it said, "Okay, why doesn't everyone here talk about why you want to be here, what your goals are, what you're trying to do?" And one of the women there said, "Oh, my goal is to write the next Oprah Winfrey book club book." Um, and I remember talking to her about it afterwards, and I was like, "Wait, that's your goal?" She goes, "Yeah, I just want to write one book. I want to do that, and that's it. I don't ever want to." Like, "Okay, that you can't do that. That can't be done, really." And she was like, "Well, who are you to say?" So, no, I'm the guy who's telling you it can't be done. And the reason it can't be done is, in order for a book to be successful, you have to have skills, you have to practice, you have to practice in a wide range of things. If you practice just at whatever it takes to, and her work reflected this, because you'd read her work and it all spoke as if it was trying to impress you. It all spoke as if it was trying to maintain that goal. There's an old I also used to teach martial arts actually for a while. And I used to have martial arts sayings for everything. But one of my favorites was the student who goes up to the master and says, "Well, how long will it take me to master kung fu?" Master says, "10 years." Student says, "Well, what happens if I try twice as hard as everybody else here?" Master says, "Oh, well, then it'll take you 20 years." Student says, "Well, wait a minute. Well, okay. What if it's just day and night, all nothing, eat, sleep, and practice, martial arts? How long will it take me?" "Well, then it will take you 30 years." She said, "Well, why is it every time I tell you I'm going to work harder, you tell me it's going to take longer?" And the master says, "Because when you have one eye on your destination, you have only one other eye with which to find the way to get there."
Oh,
Writing is an exploration. Writing is an exploration, and the people who are good at it have a vast skill set and can write what they want, when they want, under nearly any set of circumstances on command about any topic. But they've done that by writing all the stuff. And then if there is a topic that's going to lend itself towards being the next Oprah book club, you're prepared and you can do it. But you don't get to be a good writer, and you don't succeed at that with that being your goal. That's a sure way to fail. If you want to be a writer, my question is, why aren't you yet? What's holding you back? If you want to be a writer because you're just famous and you're waiting for the right idea to fall down, well, writing may not be it for you. Probably plenty of ways to get famous, but writing's a tremendous amount of work with almost no payoff for a very, very long period of time. There are easier ways to make money, but there you
well
go.
said. Well said. So any last words of encouragement for the audience?
Yes. As a writer, I think probably the single most important thing I could say is please like and subscribe. And if you want to know, wait a minute, that wasn't. Am I shilling now? I may be shilling. Um,
I definitely think that if you like, subscribe, and become a patron, it will instantly, magically,
writer.
as if by miracle, make you a better writer.
I think so. I think so. Well, hey, we do have our first patron meeting, or not our first patron, a patron meeting coming up Um, and next week, I think it's next Monday,
Hmm.
we have a Patreon meeting coming up, so we can talk about writing, or probably mostly talking about show stuff, but we'll talk about whatever. There's always loads to discuss there. Words of encouragement. uh, Find what you love writing about and what you really love to do when it comes to the writing, and then you should be able to do it. Writing is awfully solitary. You don't get a lot of encouragement. You do get a lot of people shitting on you. That's why, and I failed to mention that. That's one of the things I wanted to say earlier. One of the reasons I started doing a free workshop was because there's this sense in writers that it's a limited supply, and it kind of is, but not really. If I help somebody else become a famous writer, oh, that's a famous writer slot taken from me, and now that it's harder for me to become, famous and become, a good writer. And that just really isn't the case. And the only reason I succeeded was because of a very, very small few people who really helped me when I needed it. And the reason it was so small is because it is fiercely competitive. Writers tend to like guard their secrets like gold, and some don't, but some do. And I thought I wanted to give back to the community and really help others do it. So about all I can say is make sure you love it, because you're not going to get a lot of help. I'll try to help as much as I can, but I can't help everybody all the time either too. I get a lot of edit, but it's sort of, find help in your own love of it and being willing to keep forward and not quit. The difference between really the people who quit. What was, I think you had said, Ansgar, something to this effect. Now I'm trying to remember what it was, but
Okay, there are a lot of people with, when it comes to any artistic pursuit, it takes a few different things. There's a lot of people with talent, but they don't have the drive to pursue it. There's a lot of people with drive, but they don't have the talent to bring it together. You have to have both the drive and the talent, and that's the only way it's ever going to work.
um, I think that's for the most part true. Although honestly, I think you can have some success as a writer as long as you're willing to write on command. You can have some success as a writer without a whole heck of a lot of talent, and I do think there's a lot of. Unfortunately, the bookshelves are littered. 32,000 new books published every year.
Oh yeah, especially if you
Yeah.
get into the young adult section.
Oh Jesus, yeah. Or
Oh,
romance. Oh dear Lord.
oh God.
I went to a romance workshop once. I'll tell you about that one. That was hilarious, but that's
Oh
for
my
another time.
God.
You're gonna, if you don't try, you're gonna fail. You're guaranteed to
Hmm.
fail if you don't try. So keep it up and keep trying at it if you really love it, and hopefully you'll get somewhere.
I think those are good words, and definitely I would say any kind of art, do it for the love of it, and if money comes, money comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Don't let success, you know, get in the way of, or lack thereof, get in the way of enjoying the craft.
Yep.
Well,
All right. Well, thank you very much.
and this has been great, and we will definitely do another one of these episodes, and we'll even have call-in episodes in the future. So stay tuned in, like, subscribe, and we will see you all later.